Argentina.
Japan. Mexico 2012.
China and Mongolia.
Los Angeles and the LA Dream Center.
England.
Indonesia.
Tucson, Arizona.
Family meal.
Kyrgyzstan.
Tucson, Arizona.
My name is Bria, and I went on a missions trip with Chi Alpha to Indonesia. The first year that I went, we were set up with a Muslim driver because our missionaries had to come back to the United States for an emergency leave of absence. And our driver happened to be Muslim. The country of Indonesia has the highest Muslim population in the entire world, so it wasn't a surprise. But it was somebody the missionaries had worked with rather closely, and he knew that they were Americans and that they were probably Christians because most Americans in Indonesia are Christian. And he was very comfortable around us, and it was good because he was close to our age. One day we had an opportunity to go meet a group of Christian students at a mall, and then our Muslim driver, who we had grown rather close to at this point, asked us if we wanted to go to a soccer game instead, and it was like a city team, so it wasn't just like a group of kids playing. And we were kind of torn because we really wanted to hang out with him, we really wanted to make a good connection with him. And after deliberating, we decided we had made this commitment to go meet these students, so we decided to go. And our driver took us, and he decided that he would just hang around with us since we didn't know how long it was going to take for us to be there. And when we got there, we were met by them, and they're like, come with us, it'll just be a second, and we're going into this other room. And we're like, okay. And we walk in, and it's this giant worship service full of hundreds and hundreds of young people just worshiping and praying, and we were ushered in, and we sat in the back, and our driver was with us. And at first we were a little bit nervous because we didn't realize that this is something we were going to, and we didn't want him to feel like we had tricked him as a Muslim coming to this Christian service. But he stayed, and at one point somebody passed him a Bible that was in Indonesian because he didn't have a Bible, and everybody there assumed that he was a Christian. So, we go through this service, and we realize as this is going on, this is probably the very first time he's read a Bible, the very first time he's been to a Christian service, and we were a little bit amazed at how God had used this to open up a door. So afterwards, we went out to lunch, and the guys that were on our trip were talking with him. He was floored. It was the first time he had ever experienced God, and he said, I've never seen young people love God like these people love God. And it was a total open door for him to just know more about Jesus.
All right, turn in your Bibles to the book of Galatians. Galatians chapter 2. And we are going to read starting in verse 11. Galatians chapter 2, verse 11. Before I get into this, let me again just welcome everybody here to CCA. I'm glad you're here. Who else is glad to be here? Come on, we got a great morning, great afternoon planned. It's going to be a great day. This is part 5 of our current sermon series, Where Will You Go? Around the world, across the street, we have been talking about missions. Missions around the world. Missions here, locally. The Great Commission, considering what Jesus said. He told us to go and make disciples of every nation. Am I right? Now, before I start, let me say thank you to Caleb. Caleb's not here, I don't think. But didn't Caleb do a great job last week talking about Chi Alpha? Come on. We should give him a little bit better round of applause than that. Didn't he do a great job? Come on. It was great to have him. We appreciate all the Chi Alpha students, all the students from all the organizations that are represented here. It's just exciting to have students as a part of our church. I hope next year we can have more Chi Alpha staff, more of the campus ministries and missionaries come and speak to us. I think that'd be a good thing. We want to continue to encourage our students. Now, we have been asking the question, where will you go? The Great Commission is to go. To go into all the world, make disciples. That means that every Christian, Every person who calls themselves a follower of Jesus is called to go and take the gospel of Jesus Christ to every tribe, every tongue, every nation. To the tribes in Africa, to the closed country of Yemen, to the coffee shops of Austria, to the sushi bars of Japan, to the street corners of Tucson, Arizona. We have been focused so far in this sermon series largely on global missions, talking about missions overseas. Last week we started to bring it back home and talk about the campus. This week we're really going to begin to focus on our mission right here, this corner, basically. You know what? Caleb last week told us that leaders from around the world are coming to the U of A to get their education, right? Do you remember that? People from all over the world coming here to our doorstep. Our church is strategically placed. Not only with its proximity to the campus, but just in this neighborhood. There are refugees from all over the world, Somalia, Uganda, the Sudan. The nations are literally at our doorstep. We don't have to go very far to find people of every tribe, every tongue, and every nation. And as we wrap up the sermon series today, this is a very special day here at CCA. You know, it would be like normal for me to preach a Thanksgiving sermon, but of course, Pastor Dave's not going to do that. But I wanted to end this series here on this day because I think this is a day that really encapsulates what we are as a church. This is a day that really just, it characterizes our church from the service, all the students and families that are here to the people that we're going to serve after the service. This is what CCA is all about. And I want us to narrow this question, where will you go? I want to narrow it down to its finest point and the implication of where that challenge might take you. It very well might be around the world to a place like Austria or Japan, but it could just as easily be across the street. Just across the street. And you know what I've been telling you, we're going to focus next year on global missions. We're going to give as a church more money to global missions than we've ever given. We're going to bless missionaries in China, and I mean, you name it. It's going to be an amazing thing. We can never we have to have that burning inside of us. It has to become part of our DNA. But let me tell you something. As your pastor, I will never let us take our eyes off the ball. I will never allow us to lose sight of the call to go right here to this community, to this neighborhood, and to that campus. We can't fly from mission fields over mission fields to get to other mission fields. We have to be balanced. We have to focus on global missions, and we have to be willing to fulfill the mission God has given us right here in Tucson. The mission fields literally all around us. And the reality is this: most people will never get to go on an overseas mission trip. That's the reality. Either because of life calling or life in general, most people won't get to go overseas and preach in a sushi bar. Not that you're going to preach in a sushi bar. I keep pointing at Nathaniel, but maybe you will preach in a sushi bar. Come on. Not everybody gets to go to Austria and sit in a cafe and connect with people. We're sending 7 missionaries to Austria. In case you didn't hear, Luke and Lindsay had their baby, right? Everybody. We were going to bring the Austria team up here today and pray over them, but without Luke and Lindsay, I'm not going to do that. But we're going to send 7 people to Austria. That's a very small percentage of our church. 7 people. Most people will never get to go do those things. But here is the reality. God has placed us in the middle of a mission field. The mission field's right before our eyes. It's right before your eyes. Like I said, you don't have to go far to find people of every tribe, every tongue, every nation. And you don't have to go very far to answer that question. Where will you go? And I think sometimes we need a wake-up call. Sometimes we need to be shaken up. Sometimes we need to be reminded of the mission field that's right before us, exactly what we are called to do, what this is all about. Come on, our church we're not called here just to play church. We're not. It's fun to play church every once in a while. No one likes to play church more than me. I like to make sure the chairs are all set up and the video's all done, and I like that. But listen, we're not called to play church. CCA, we're not here just simply to put out great music and great preaching, although we do that. This church exists. People call this church home for one reason and one reason only. We exist strictly because of the Great Commission. This church exists to go to the homeless community and declare the hope of Christ. This church exists to go into homes across the street, broken homes, homes that are torn apart by divorce and by all kinds of different things. We're called to go to those homes, and we're called to declare that Jesus saves. We're called to go to the drug addict and declare freedom, to the porn addict and declare deliverance. We're called to go to the sick and declare healing. We're called to go to the brokenhearted and declare that there's a future. Come on, I'll say amen if you're not. Thank you, Jake. All right. Today, I don't mean to yell, but I'm passionate because this excites me. And today we're going to be reminded of just what that means for our church. And by virtue of you calling this church home, if you call this church home, these things we're going to talk about apply to us and our mission here at CCA. First, we're going to read this passage in Galatians. I'm going to point out 3 different things. I'm not going to talk for long because we want to get to what we're here to do today, which is serve. But I feel like we need to be reminded of some things. Let's read this passage in Galatians. We're going to start in verse 11. This is the Apostle Paul talking about a little conflict he had with the disciple Peter. Let's read this. Now, when Peter had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision. And the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if you, being a Jew, live in the manner of Gentile and not as the Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? Now, what we just read is one of the great conflicts of the New Testament. The Apostle Paul getting in Peter's grill, getting in Peter's face. Now, this is the Peter, let me remind you. This is the dude that walked on water with Jesus. This is the dude that denied Christ around the fire that night. This is the dude that Jesus said, upon this rock I'll build my church. That Peter, okay? And Paul has the audacity to get in his grill and call him out. Why is Paul doing that? Because Peter has lost sight of the mission. Peter has lost sight of the Great Commission. Let me give you a little background here. The early church, after Jesus ascended into heaven, the early church was just Jews. The gospel was being preached to Jews, and the people who were responding were Jews. It wasn't until around Acts chapter 10, you can go read it later, that people who were non-Jews, Gentiles, began to respond to the gospel. This guy named Cornelius gets saved, and before you know it, there's a revival. And all of the apostles and the disciples who were Jews, they had this debate. They had to have this thing they wrestled with, and it was the gospel of Jesus really for all people? That was what they were wrestling with. And if it was, did those people need to conform to the Jewish rituals and traditions and customs? And Peter, in Acts chapter 10, verse 34, has a revelation. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to paraphrase it. You can read it later. He basically says, yes, the gospel is for all people, and that salvation did not come strictly by adhering to Jewish customs and Jewish laws. What a great revelation. And Peter begins to live that revelation. He begins to live his life among the Gentiles. He begins to become a light in a dark place. He begins to live the Great Commission. But now we know our old buddy Peter. He's a little flaky. Peter sometimes has some issues. Peter sometimes can get a little distracted. Peter can sometimes, he can go down the wrong path. And so what happens here is, while Peter is living his life among the Gentiles, and while he is living the reality of the Great Commission, some religious church people caused him to withdraw because he's worried about what they're going to think. Peter withdraws back to his safe Jewish church environment because he fears who Paul calls those of the circumcision. Now, some of your translations may say the circumcision party. We have the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They have the circumcision party. Doesn't sound like a party I want to be a part of, but I would think in 2012, the circumcision party might be more popular than the Republicans or the Democrats. Come on. So these were Jewish Christians who felt that Gentiles had to conform to the Jewish rites and customs in order to actually be saved. at the forefront of that was circumcision. Now, what does this all mean for us and missions and our call to go to this community? Well, here's my first thought. In order to answer Jesus' call to go, we must have some Gentiles in our life. Actually, the way I had it originally written was, in order to answer Jesus' call to go, we must have some uncircumcised Gentiles in our life. But I'm not going to say it that way, although I just did. We got to get some non-believers in our life. We need to get modern day Gentiles into our life. Come on. You can't just hole yourself up in your safe little church cocoon environment and try to get people to conform to your church culture. The gospel's not about our church culture. I love our church culture. I think we've got the greatest church culture in all of Tucson. I love it. And I think if people would experience our church culture, they'd want to be a part of it. But the reality is that the gospel is not about our church culture. What is the gospel about? Pretty simple. Believe in your heart, confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, you'll be saved. That no man comes to the Father except by him, right? Pretty simple. It's not about our culture. And we have to be willing to go to dark places. We have to be willing to have people in our lives who maybe don't look like us, don't act like us, and don't believe like us in order to really fulfill the Great Commission. And that takes, you have to be strong to do that. You have to be built up, right? And that's the church's job. That's one of my jobs, is to build you up, to strengthen you, give you good teaching, disciple you, do those kinds of things so that you are trained and ready to go to places and to people who are not in this building. One person's hearing me, the beautiful lady in the front. As a Christ follower, I think sometimes it's easy to get sheltered. To live our lives simply among Christians and try to figure out how to get the big bad world through our doors. Listen, that's not the Great Commission. Jesus didn't, when he left the earth, he didn't say, get everybody to come in. He told us to go. That's the Great Commission, to go to those who need to hear. We need to live our lives among the dying and the hurting, not the living and the saved. And that's not to say that we don't need each other. We need each other, right? You need to come to church, trust me. Anybody that knows me knows I would never tell you not to come to church. You need to come to church. But we cannot isolate ourselves from the people that Christ has called us to reach. I love that story that Sarah told. Where's Sarah? Right there in front. About last week about Han. It was a great story about how she had to go and just make relationship in the international student community. It was awesome. And when he decided to follow Christ, and they asked him, what made you decide to follow Christ? And he said, because Rob's my best friend. Wasn't that an amazing story? I loved it. We just connecting with people who didn't look like us, didn't talk like us. We used to do this thing on Saturday night after we moved our Saturday night service here. In case you didn't know, we have a Saturday night service. And we moved it from the house, the original place where the church was. We moved it here. We wanted to keep our connection to 4th Avenue. Now, we don't do this anymore, and I'm feeling really convicted that we don't do this anymore. But, you know, 4th Avenue is like the real party place. I'm sure you guys don't know that. I'll have to fill you in on that later. And so, you know, there's all the bars, all the clubs, all that kind of stuff. And we wanted to maintain our connection. So we had this thing we called Crash. We figured, well, we're Christians. Let's go crash the party. Right? Not with megaphones and stuff. That ain't us. But let's just go live our lives on 4th Avenue. Instead of coming in here and singing and hearing Pastor Dave preach, as good as that is, let's go out on 4th Avenue. And so that's what we did. We would, instead of having church on Saturday night, we met at my house, we prayed, and then 4 or 5 of us would go out. 4 or 5 went to the shanty and played pool. We found out pool's not from the devil. Hallelujah. Some people went to the Sky Bar and just hung out. Some people went to the Epic Cafe. We didn't do stupid stuff. We didn't compromise our beliefs or compromise our faith or anything like that. We just decided we're going to live life in front of people. We're going to try to connect with people. We need to do that some more, I think, don't you? Come on. There are relationships for you that are not here. Lifelong relationships that God has ordained, but you have to go. Maybe a husband, a wife, a best friend. I can tell you back when we started the church, we used to go bowling. 2 of our greatest friends are sitting back there because we went bowling. Larry and Laura are here, right? We didn't know them. If we hadn't gone bowling, we'd have never met them. Dottie, most of you know Dottie. We met her bowling. Now she's one of the great supporters of Family Meal. Does so much for the guys over there. It's great. We go bowling, and bowling alley is a pretty dark place. I think Larry's favorite thing to do is we'd be bowling with another team, they'd be drinking and stuff, and he was just waiting for them to say, "What does CCA mean?" And he'd go, "That's a church." "Really?" "Yeah, and that's the pastor." And they go, "Blah, blah, blah." It was funny. Anyway, listen, we don't do that stuff simply to be cool, although we are pretty cool. We do that because Christ gave us the command to go. And here is the completion of this thought. Hear me. And this is what Peter struggles with. And there's a lot more here that I'm not pulling in. But Peter, we can never let the modern day circumcision group, the modern day religious people, those that would say, "Well, you need to do it this way." "What do you mean you didn't have music and you didn't preach?" We can never let those people cause us to live in fear. Peter was in fear. Maybe because he thought they'd abandoned him, they wouldn't support, maybe he thought they'd stop tithing, I don't know. But Paul reminds him with some righteous indignation just what the Great Commission was all about, just what he was put here on the earth to do. So number one, get some Gentiles in your life. Here's my second thought. Turn to Matthew chapter 20. It's just going to get better. Everybody doing okay? You're all in? We don't need stretching exercises or anything? Not yet. Matthew chapter 20. I think I'll read, let's start at 25. The disciples have been having a conflict, wanting to know which one of them would be the greatest, who would be sitting by Jesus' side in heaven. And so Jesus, in verse 25, it says, he called them, his disciples, to himself and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Our church's main value is to serve with no strings attached. That's going to be on our sign outside. Real excited about our sign. Here's my second thought. In order to answer Christ's call to go, you must be willing to become a servant. I believe that for this church, I'm just talking for CCA right now. I think it applies everywhere, but I'm going to talk just to our church. In order for us to reach the world for Christ, we must be willing to serve the world. Preach through our actions, not necessarily our words. Now, hear me. My wife just got a great teaching on this week that she shared with me, and that is that at some point words are necessary. Okay? At some point you have to speak. The gospel is the word of God. It has to be spoken. It has to be heard. But there are times I think Christians just talk a little too much. I think we like to hear ourselves talk. We need to do a little less talking and a lot more serving. I think sometimes we're a little too interested in position, what it looks like, the display of our gifts or whatever, instead of being the example that Jesus is talking about here, the example of a servant. And I think this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the series, which was expectations. We have expectations, especially when we talk about missionaries or evangelism. This is really an evangelism sermon. We have things, we think about just these great things, preaching at the pulpit and going on the street corner and doing whatever. We have these expectations. But listen, missionaries here at CCA, we must realize we have been called here to serve, not be elevated. We've been called here to serve, not just be spiritual consumers. I get people that'll come to me and they'll go, "Well, Pastor Dave, that was great preaching, great music, love that, and that was awesome. But what's here for me and my family? What kind of ministries do you have?" My response to that usually is, "This probably ain't the church for you, dude. Probably not the church for you. If you're just a spiritual consumer, you're going to get real uncomfortable here real quick." Our goal, one of the goals of our church is to have each of our demographics serve the other demographic. Older people, you're called to serve these students. Students, you're called to serve the homeless people. Homeless people, you're called to serve the community across the street. We're called to serve each other, to communicate the gospel through serving. Any of you have a problem with that? Come on, some of us do. That philosophy gets me in trouble a lot, especially with the circumcision party. Because I'm more apt to serve than I am to preach. People will ask me all the time, they'll say, "Pastor Dave, will you mentor me? Pastor Dave, will you pour into my life? Please, Pastor Dave, oh please, oh please, oh please. And I'll say, no problem. 5:45 Thursday night, meet me right here. I got a pair of plastic gloves for you. It'll be great. Usually one time. Why? Because there's not a lot of glory in serving. It's not our expectation. You get taken advantage of. You get spit on. You get walked on. See, that's what Jesus had to deal with. That's what that scripture's talking about. He had to get taken advantage of. He had to get spit on and all of that to be a servant of all mankind. And listen, when you decide you're going to be a servant, you're going to reach the world, you're going to fulfill the Great Commission by serving, trust me, you'll get taken advantage of. This church, we get taken advantage of just the way it is. I do that with my eyes wide open. I know what we're doing. But you know what? I've heard it said that if you want to be a bridge of hope for lost, hurting people to get to Jesus, if you want to be that bridge, at some point you're going to have to be walked on. Listen, on this property where I'm the lead pastor, I've been spit on. I've had more F-bombs thrown at me. I've picked up more whiskey bottles than any pastor in the whole country. And listen, I am willing to get walked on, to get taken advantage of if just one person today were to come to faith in Christ. Just one. My wife and I, if you were at the Teen Challenge Banquet the other day, we got to see a video about Hannah. And Hannah was a springboard girl back when we first started the church. And she used to come to CCA on Saturday nights, sit in the back. And the video told the story about how she was just a mess when she came into Springboard, and it was all her life was just a disaster. And my wife told a story about how she ran one day at Spiritual Emphasis. I was leading worship at that Spiritual Emphasis, and I remember the commotion. If you come on a Saturday night, we have the Springboard girls here on Saturday night. Every once in a while, one of them might run, and usually during worship, and you see this commotion that goes on. It's like this commotion. I remember being up there leading worship, and this commotion happened, and all this stuff was going on, and she ran, and Roger had to go get her, and it was this craziness. But this video talked about how Springboard had put her life back together. And as I was sitting there, the reality is that I got to perform her wedding ceremony. She's married, has kids, and the video showed her family. I got to perform her wedding ceremony. And I went up and I told my wife, I'll get walked on for her. I'll get walked on for future Hannahs. I'll get taken advantage of for her. Are you with me? Serving. No strings attached. That means that, like Jesus, simply serving for the sake of serving. Not so that we can convince them that our church is so cool that they should come here, although our church is that cool and they should come here. That's not what it's about. Simply the purpose of connecting, building relationship, and pointing the way to Christ, like Chi Alpha did with Han. Will you keep handing out plates of food at family meal, every Thursday, every Tuesday, at breakfast, even if it takes years for one person to realize what that's all about? Even if they take off and go to California somewhere and some other church gets to lead them in faith to Christ. Oh, as a pastor, that's tough. That's tough because we put all our resources, we put all our time into trying to minister to somebody and someone else gets to lead them in faith to Christ. That ain't fair. Will you serve the Islamic community, even though in the natural it may not pay dividends for you or your ministry? Will you serve these kids across the street? Will you let them cry the whole time Pastor Dave's preaching? Listen, let me tell you something about these kids. Those of you that minister to the kids and volunteer with the kids, you may think, man, we got the squirreliest bunch in any church in the world. Okay? I mean, they're all from this community, and people bring their kids, and sometimes you think, maybe they're not hearing me. Maybe they're not listening. Maybe, you know what? Let me tell you something. Forget about the impact it's making now, but in 10, 15, 20 years, when those kids maybe are far away from here, and they're in some other environment, and some pastor preaches to them, or somebody connects with them, they're going to remember that silly church on the corner that did all that stupid stuff. And it will have an impact in their life. Trust me, it will. They'll remember. It will make a difference. So be willing to serve. If you want to answer Jesus' call to go, be willing to serve. Here's the last point before I close. I said I wasn't going to take long. I promised, didn't I? Turn to Matthew chapter 5, just a couple pages back. In order to answer Christ's call to go, we must be willing to serve and love the unlovable. Matthew 5, let me start in verse 43. This is the Sermon on the Mount. It says, this is Jesus speaking, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor, hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemy, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who spitefully use you," "and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brothers only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." There's so much there. There's actually two separate things I thought about bringing today. The one I'll talk about in a second, but the one I wasn't going to talk about, I'll spend about a minute on. Jesus was talking about loving your enemies, and that's a difficult thing for me. Very difficult. Because your enemies are very unlovable. Am I right? And I was taken to the Last Supper. And I don't know, I have visions of the Last Supper. It's just the Da Vinci thing, and it just seems like it's just this glorious Christian event, the last meal for Jesus and his disciples. And think about it. At that meal, Jesus, he operated in the prophetic. He knew that sitting in that room were people who were going to betray him and deny him and abandon him. He knew it. Those disciples had to be the most unlovable group to Jesus at that moment of anybody else. And what did Jesus do? He washed their feet, right? He took a towel and he kneeled down at their feet and he washed their feet. The people he knew were going to abandon him and he knew were going to betray him. I struggle with that, I'll be really honest with you. I'd be more apt to make them think I was going to wash their feet, get their shoes off, and then I'd whack them and run away. I would too, wouldn't I? When I don't have the pastor hat on, that is. But here's the other part of this. One of the callings of our church is to love those nobody else loves. To love the unlovable. It's easy to love those that are lovable. All of you people are very lovable, and it's very easy to love all of you. But there's going to be people today that might not be so easy to love. In the church world, they do study after study after study trying to find out where to plant churches and which demographics will be able to support a new church. Let me tell you something. The demographics we're called to reach don't end up on any of those reports. I firmly believe that this church is called to reach the people nobody else wants. Remember when you were a kid and you'd go out to recess and they picked teams and the worst thing in the world would have been to get picked last? Those are going to be the people on our team. Some of you know that better than others. You know what? The homeless guy that only comes around every time there's a meal? I'll take him. The college student who tithes on their leftover ramen and macaroni and cheese, I'll take her. I'll take the transvestite on 4th Avenue who thinks Christians are mean and hateful and all of that. And you guys don't realize, I pray that those people will show up here. We all say amen, and like, yes, Pastor Dave, but what are you going to do when they really show up? Listen, those of you that have been here all the time know that I pray for the sexually broken to come here. I'm praying all the time that those who struggle with same-sex attraction and pornography issues, I pray that they'd be here. I think our church is a safe place for those people. I think we minister to a lot of those folks. But, we say amen, but what are you going to do when somebody who a little bit, might smell a little bit, might be dressed a little funny, sits down next to you? Everybody says amen, all right? I get a lot of that. But you know what I usually get next from people? That usually it's like, Pastor, that is great. I'm going to write you a check. And, man, you just keep doing what you're doing. That's usually what happens. Our calling as a church is to love the unlovable. The ones nobody else wants. The ones nobody else thinks can support a church. That's what we're called to do. Maybe you feel like you're in that group, maybe you don't. But if you're here, you know what? We're going to go after the ones who are the last ones picked at recess. So, those are my 3 thoughts today. Get some Gentiles in your life. Be willing to serve. And let's love the unlovable. That's our calling here in Tucson. As I wrap up this sermon series, I'll wrap it up with this. You know, we've been talking about missions. We've been talking about it around the world. We've been talking about where will you go? What are you called to do? I want to encourage you to not be just a spiritual consumer. Don't just come into this church, any church, with your fork and your knife, feed me, feed me, feed me. You know that old line. Oink, oink, oink. Give me something, Pastor Dave. You know what? I'll give you something. But if that's the only part of your faith that you're living, you're missing 95% of your Christian walk. Jesus' command was to go. Make disciples. Go into all the world. To every tribe, every tongue, every nation. And I want to challenge you with that. Where are you called to go? What are you called to do? Stop just being a spiritual consumer and go to all the world and make disciples. Let's pray. Thank you, Jesus.